Tuesday, 9 a.m., inside a wildlife hospital in Florida, a baby elephant named Benny had his death scheduled like an appointment. He was failing, his front leg was deformed, and nobody wanted the cost. But Dr. Lauren Hayes saw what the board refused to see, a pair of eyes that wouldn't give up. And with just 72 hours on the clock, she had to choose, protect her career, or tear up that death schedule and get him out alive. The Gulf Coast Wildlife Hospital always smelled faintly of bleach and salt air, like the ocean was trying to disinfect what people couldn't fix. Fluorescent light pooled on stainless steel counters, and every sound, footsteps, clinking trays, the steady ping of monitors, felt too loud. Dr. Lauren Hayes moved through it like someone who'd learned to keep her heart behind glass. Lauren wasn't a zoo vet. She was the one they called when a pelican came in, wrapped in fishing line, when a bobcat limped off a highway shoulder, when a sea turtle swallowed a hook and stopped eating. Wildlife didn't come with owners or budgets, just emergencies. She'd spent years learning how to keep panic out of her hands. That morning, the ICU door stood half open, and a chart clipped to it looked heavier than paper should. Euthanasia. Authorization sat at the top in crisp black type, beneath it a date and time that made the room feel colder. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Even the ink seemed final, like a signature carved into stone. On the table inside lay Benny, 10 weeks old, a baby elephant small enough to make the word elephant feel wrong. His skin was loose over sharp ribs, his belly hollowed, his breath shallow and uneven. One front leg angled subtly inward, underbuilt in a way that explained the bruises on his knees. He'd tried to stand. He'd failed. He'd kept trying anyway. The hospital wasn't built for elephants, not really. They had a reinforced table borrowed from a marine rescue unit, padded straps meant for dolphins, heat lamps arranged. Like a desperate prayer, a bottle of electrolyte solution sat beside him like an apology. Lauren read the vitals and didn't like what they were saying, even when they weren't screaming. Down the hall, the boardroom door was shut, but voices leaked through in clipped bursts. Costs, liability, precedent. Someone mentioned donors the way you might mention weather, unavoidable, indifferent. Lauren had heard those words before, just never attached to something so young. She kept walking because stopping would mean reacting. A nurse in scrubs, Kayla, barely out of school, caught up to her near the supply closet. Her eyes were red, and she spoke like she was afraid the air itself might report her. "They already called it," she whispered. "They said if he doesn't turn around by tonight, they won't extend anything. Tuesday is locked." Lauren didn't answer right away. She checked the medication cart, adjusted a dosage that didn't feel like enough, and stared at the blank space where a miracle was supposed to go. Wildlife medicine trained you to accept limits. Nature didn't negotiate. But this wasn't nature. This was a schedule, a meeting, a line item. That difference kept tapping at her ribs. She returned to Benny's stall and studied him the way she studied injured raptors. Not just the wound, but what it cost them to keep fighting. Faint bruising circled the base of his leg, too neat to be accidental, like a rope had lived there. His trunk twitched once, a tiny search for contact. Lauren's throat tightened, then released, as if her body refused to hold that feeling. A soft chime sounded from her phone, an internal memo alert. The subject line read, "Final Disposition Plan." She didn't open it. She didn't have to. Lauren had seen what final meant in 100 forms. A gull you couldn't save, a fox you euthanized with your own hands. But those cases ended with relief. This one ended with paperwork. Kayla slipped back, in, shoulders hunched, as if she expected someone to grab her by the collar. "I'm not supposed to show you this," she said, and held out her tablet. On the screen, a hallway camera angle caught two board members outside the ICU, one gesturing toward Benny's door. Their words were muffled, but the tone wasn't. It sounded like they were discussing a broken forklift. Lauren felt heat climb her chest, then cool into something sharper. She turned the tablet off and handed it back carefully, like it was fragile evidence. "Don't send that to anyone," she said, voice low. "Not yet." Kayla nodded, frightened and relieved at the same time. And Lauren realized the hospital was already splitting into sides. When Lauren stepped into the ICU again, she did it slowly, as if the room might shatter. Benny lay still, but his eyes weren't fully closed anymore. For a second, she thought she imagined it. Then his gaze lifted, heavy and deliberate, and found her through the glass. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was a quiet, stubborn awareness that made her skin prickle. She stood there until the monitor's rhythm filled her ears, until her own breathing matched his. The rest of the hospital blurred into a distant hum, the arguments and budgets and deadlines becoming background noise. Lauren didn't touch him yet. She just watched. And somewhere in that sterile light, with Tuesday waiting like a trap, she felt the first crack in her professional distance, small, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Lauren returned before dawn, when the hospital still felt half asleep and the lobby lights were dimmed to a polite glow. The ocean wind rattled a loose sign outside, and for a moment everything seemed normal. Another day, another rescue. Then she saw the ICU schedule on the wall, and Tuesday stared back at her again. Inside, Benny's stall looked unchanged, but Lauren noticed the small things her tired eyes missed the day before. A drying smear of formula on the towel, a faint tremor in his flank after each breath, the way his good leg was tucked, guarding his weak one like a secret. She checked the line, the heart rate, the warmth in his ears. Kayla slipped in behind her, hair still damp from a rushed shower, carrying a fresh bottle like it was contraband. "He didn't sleep," she murmured. "He keeps trying." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she glanced toward the hallway as if the board might materialize from the fluorescent glare. Benny's eyes were open now, dark and glossy, following every movement without panic. When Lauren leaned closer, he lifted his head an inch, then another, as if he was testing gravity. His trunk searched the air, slow and clumsy, brushing the blanket. The monitor stayed steady, but Lauren felt her pulse climb anyway. She adjusted the padding beneath his shoulder and spoke softly, not because she believed he understood English, but because quiet had always helped frightened animals. Benny blinked once, long and deliberate, then fixed on her again. It was the kind of look she'd seen in foxes pulled from traps. Hurt, yes, but not defeated. Not done. Then he tried to stand. The movement started as a tremble, a gathering of will inside a body that didn't have much left to give. Benny pushed up with his back legs, rocking forward. His weak front leg folded instantly, and his knee struck the mat with a dull thud. He didn't cry out. He just inhaled, steadied, and tried again. Lauren's hands hovered, ready to catch him, but she forced herself to wait. If she rushed, she'd spook him. If she held him too much, he'd never learn. Benny managed a crooked half-rise, swaying like a newborn foal. For one breath, he was upright. Then he slipped and fell, and the room went very still. Kayla covered her mouth, eyes shining. Lauren swallowed hard, felt the sharp edge of anger that had no clean target. Not at Benny. Not at the board. At the idea that effort like that could be answered with a scheduled ending, as if his life was just an appointment slot between lunch and paperwork. Benny turned his head toward the observation window and made a small, searching motion with his trunk. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't cute. It looked like instinct. Reach for someone, something, anything that might reach back. He took a shaky step toward the glass, then another, and stopped with his forehead inches from it. Lauren stepped to the other side of the window without thinking, palm pressed flat against the cool surface. Benny's trunk lifted, wavered, and tapped the glass where her hand was. The sound was soft, almost nothing, but it landed in her chest like a knock on a locked door. She felt her professional distance crack wider. She left the stall and made calls from the hallway, voice tight, words measured. Sanctuary after sanctuary offered sympathy and refusal. "We don't have the space. We don't have elephant staff. Insurance. Won't touch it." One director paused long enough to ask, gently, "What's his prognosis?" Lauren looked back at the ICU door and said, "He wants to live." By noon, the board's email arrived. Short, polished, merciless. No extension. No exceptions. Humane resolution is scheduled. Lauren read it twice, then once more, as if repetition might change the meaning. Kayla watched her face and whispered, "What are you going to do?" Lauren didn't answer. Not yet. That afternoon, Lauren returned to Benny with a bottle and a steadier voice. She fed him slowly, letting him set the pace, praising him like a child for simply swallowing. Benny drank, then leaned forward, resting the tip of his trunk against the towel near her wrist. It wasn't a hug. It was smaller than that, but it felt like trust offered in a place that didn't deserve it. When Lauren finally stepped out into the corridor, she didn't feel heroic. She felt tired and cornered and painfully awake. Tuesday was still there, waiting. The system was still moving in its straight, efficient line. But something had shifted inside her, quiet as a tide turning. And she knew, with a calm that scared her, she wasn't going to let that schedule be the last word. Lauren walked into the boardroom with the same calm she used around wounded predators. Slow movements, steady eyes. No sudden fear. The long table was polished to a shine that made everyone's coffee cups look important. At the far end, a framed mission statement hung on the wall, and she couldn't help noticing how clean the words were. The director, Mr. Halverson, didn't offer her a seat. He tapped a folder with one finger, as if that alone should settle the discussion. "We've reviewed your notes," he said. "We appreciate your compassion. But this is a hospital, not a sanctuary. Tuesday stands." Around him, board members avoided her gaze. Lauren kept her hands folded, because if she let them move, they might betray her. "He's not in uncontrolled pain," she said. "He's responsive. He's eating. He's trying to stand." She chose each sentence like a stone placed carefully across a river. "Give him 2 more weeks. Let us stabilize him. Then we can talk about options." A woman in a blazer, one of the finance officers, sighed softly, as if Lauren was asking for something childish. 2 weeks becomes 2 months, she said. Then a year. And then we own an elephant. She spoke the last word like it was a lawsuit. We can't justify draining resources from multiple cases to fund one. Lauren felt heat rise in her neck. She didn't argue with the math. Math was honest. What made her furious was the certainty with which they treated an animal's will to live as irrelevant. "You're not choosing between 5 animals and 1, she said quietly. "You're choosing between your spreadsheet and your mission." Halverson's mouth tightened. "Our mission is to help as many as possible," he replied. "You know that." He slid the folder toward her. Inside were printed estimates, staff hours, medication, transport costs, facility modifications. At the bottom, a donor note was stapled like a warning. A major sponsor would reconsider their funding if the hospital deviated from operational priorities. Lauren stared at the donor's name. She recognized it from the plaque in the lobby, the one people took photos beside at fundraisers. The message was polite, but the meaning was blunt. Do what we expect, or we pull the plug. For a second, she imagined Tuesday as a rope tied to a stranger's wallet. A throat cleared near the door. Officer Mike Turner stepped in without knocking, broad-shouldered and sunburned, wearing a badge that made the room suddenly more careful. He didn't smile. He scanned faces the way he scanned illegal roadside cages. "I'm here because I received a complaint," he said, "about a scheduled euthanasia and possible welfare violations." The board members stiffened, as if oxygen had thinned. Halverson tried to regain control. "Officer, we follow protocol," he said. "This is a medical decision." Mike's eyes slid to Lauren, then back to the director. "Medical decisions can still violate welfare standards," he replied, "especially when they're influenced by funding pressure." Lauren's chest tightened. She hadn't called Mike. She hadn't dared. She glanced at Kayla through the glass panel in the hallway. Kayla stood there with her arms crossed, pale and determined, and Lauren understood. Kayla had pushed the complaint through the only channel she had left. It was reckless. It was brave. It could destroy her job. Mike asked to see Benny. The board hesitated, then agreed, because saying no would look worse. In the ICU, Benny lay still, but his eyes tracked the new man immediately. Mike watched for a long moment, then crouched to inspect the bruising around the leg, the wear on the knees, the thinness under the skin. His expression didn't soften, but it sharpened. "Where did he come from?" Mike asked. The director gave a vague answer about a private facility shutting down. Mike didn't like vague. He pressed again. A staff member admitted quietly that the previous owner had kept exotic animals without proper permits. That Benny may have been restrained. That paperwork was missing. The air turned heavy with implications. Back in the hall, Mike faced Lauren like a man weighing risk. "You want to fight this," he said. It wasn't a question. Lauren held his gaze. "I want time," she answered, "and I want him out of a system that treats him like a cost." Mike's jaw flexed. "Time requires proof," he said. "Not hope, proof." He laid out the terms with blunt precision. If Lauren wanted to claim custody, she'd need a compliant facility, transport plan, veterinary oversight, and financial documentation. Fast. 72 hours, he said. "If you can't meet the standards, the hospital proceeds. And I won't stop them." He paused. "If you can meet them, I will." When Mike walked away, the corridor felt louder, as if every fluorescent bulb had started humming in judgment. Kayla approached, voice low. "I'm sorry," she said, shaking. "I didn't know what else to do." Lauren looked at her, young, scared, still choosing the hard right over the easy safe, and felt something steady lock into place. That evening, Lauren stood alone in Benny's doorway while the hospital shifted into night mode. A janitor's cart squeaked past. Somewhere a phone rang and went unanswered. Benny's breathing was slow, stubbornly consistent. Lauren watched the rise and fall of his chest, then looked down at the date on her watch. Tuesday wasn't a story. It was a deadline. And now there was another clock layered on top of it, Mike's 72 hours, ticking with the weight of law. Lauren felt fear, clear and sharp, but beneath it was something stronger. She took out her phone, opened her contacts, and started making calls. Not to sanctuaries this time, but to builders, to vets, to anyone who owed her a favor. If the system insisted on a schedule, then she would write a different one. Lauren's resignation letter was only 3 sentences long, but her hand shook as she signed it. It felt like cutting a rope that had held her upright for years, even when it chafed. She slid the envelope under Halverson's office door after hours, when the hallway cameras blinked and no one was watching. Then she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since Tuesday was announced. Bay Haven wasn't a sanctuary yet, not in any official sense. It was 50 rough acres north of Tampa, with palmetto scrub, sandy soil, and a half-finished shed Lauren once told herself she'd get to someday. Now, under Mike Turner's 72-hour clock, that land became a promise. She had to build with her bare hands. Hope, in this moment, looked a lot like paperwork. She drove straight there that night, headlights carving a tunnel through dark pines. The air smelled of damp earth, and salt carried inland, and frogs sang like they didn't know deadlines existed. Lauren stood in the open field with her phone pressed to her ear, calling contractors who'd ignored her for months. A few hung up. One laughed. Then a gravel-voiced man named Pete finally said, "If you pay cash, I'll be there at sunrise." By dawn, the property sounded like a construction site and a war room at the same time. A skid steer groaned, boards slammed, and Kayla arrived in her old sedan with a trunk full of donated heat lamps and extension cords. Her scrubs were wrinkled and her eyes were fierce. "I called in sick," she said. "They're going to know." Lauren didn't argue. She just nodded and handed her a pair of gloves. Lauren's phone didn't stop vibrating. A fencing company demanded a deposit. An insurance agent asked if she was out of her mind. A permit office put her on hold so long she could hear someone eating chips in the background. Each call felt like another door, locked from the inside. Lauren kept speaking anyway, voice steady, refusing to let urgency turn into pleading. She called Dr. Ethan Brooks 3 times before he answered. His voice was familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. Flat, controlled, a man who'd once blamed her for a case neither of them could save. "Lauren," he said, like the name tasted complicated. She didn't waste time. "I need orthopedic support for a juvenile elephant," she said, "and I need it now." There was a long pause, filled with distance and history. "No," Ethan said finally. That's a liability I'm not touching. Lauren stared at the unfinished enclosure, posts crooked in the sand, workers hammering like time could be nailed down, and felt her patience splinter. "Tuesday," she said. "9 a.m.? They'll kill him." The line went quiet again, and when Ethan spoke, his voice had changed. "Send me the vitals," he said, "and don't romanticize it." Back at the hospital, Lauren moved like someone trying not to startle a fragile thing. She didn't tell staff more than she had to. She didn't ask permission she knew she wouldn't get. Kayla slipped her copies of Benny's latest labs with trembling hands. "They're watching me," Kayla whispered. Lauren tucked the papers into her bag like they were passports out of a country that didn't want them. That afternoon, the board issued a formal notice. If Benny was moved, the hospital would not be responsible for outcomes. It was written in legal language that smelled like disinfectant, clean, sharp, meant to protect the institution from guilt. Halverson added a personal note at the bottom. "Lauren, don't do this. You'll ruin yourself." She read it once and felt something inside her go still. Then Benny crashed. It happened during a routine feeding, in the quiet hour when emergencies usually waited their turn. His gums paled. His breathing turned shallow, quick, then suddenly too slow. The monitor's tone changed. Subtle, but to Lauren it was a siren. Staff rushed in. Someone muttered, "Here we go," like it was proof of the board's prediction. Lauren snapped into motion, hands steady despite the fear behind her ribs. She stabilized him with fluids and heat, adjusted the formula, coaxed his body back from the edge with the kind of focus that left no room for panic. When the line finally steadied, she realized Kayla was crying behind a cabinet, silent so no one would accuse her of being unprofessional. Lauren wanted to comfort her. Instead, she squeezed her shoulder once, quick, grounding, and returned to Benny. Benny's eyes opened again after the crisis, slower this time, as if waking was work. He looked at Lauren, and she hated how close. She'd come to losing him before she'd even had the chance to save him. In the faint glow of the heat lamps, his trunk shifted toward her wrist and stopped, hovering like a question. Lauren leaned in and whispered, "Not yet," though she didn't know if she meant him or herself. Night fell, and Bay Haven continued to take shape under floodlights. Pete's crew worked past dinner, driven by cash, and maybe by the way Kayla kept glancing at the clock like it could bite. Ethan texted a list of supplies, custom padding, a sling harness, meds that weren't cheap. Lauren looked at her bank app, then at Benny's chart, and made the decision without ceremony. She tapped transfer. As she drove back toward the property, the sky over Florida turned the color of bruised peaches, beautiful and indifferent. Lauren felt the weight of what she'd started settle onto her shoulders, not as inspiration, but as responsibility. 72 hours didn't feel like time anymore. It felt like a narrow bridge over deep water. And somewhere behind her, in a sterile ICU, a baby elephant waited for a schedule to change. Tuesday arrived with a gray sky and a wind that carried the smell of rain from the Gulf. At the hospital, people spoke softer than usual, like they were walking through a chapel. The transport team rolled in before sunrise with a specialized trailer and straps laid out neatly, the way you lay out instruments before surgery. Everything looked prepared, and that was the problem. Lauren signed the first stack of forms with a pen that kept slipping in her sweaty fingers. Each page had a line that reminded her, again and again, that she was assuming all risk. Halverson stood nearby, expression controlled, as if he could keep the whole thing professional if he didn't blink. "You can still stop," he said quietly. Lauren didn't look up. "So can you," she replied. Officer Mike Turner arrived with a clipboard and the kind of calm that came from never expecting miracles. He walked Bay Haven's inspection photos, checked the permit numbers, asked to see the transport plan Ethan had drafted. Lauren watched him like a storm watch, waiting for the moment he'd say no. Mike's mouth stayed flat, but he didn't close the folder. That small mercy felt enormous. In Benny's ICU stall, the air was warm from heat lamps and tense with anticipation. Kayla stood at the corner, hands clasped so tight her knuckles looked bleached. Ethan had come in person, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp. "We do this clean," he told Lauren. "Not unkind, just blunt. No hero moves." Lauren nodded, because she knew one bad decision could break everything. The sedative went in slowly. Benny's eyelids drooped, then fluttered, then held. His breathing remained steady, but his trunk made a small, searching curl, as if it still wanted to find something familiar. Lauren kept her voice low, talking to him the way she talked to frightened raptors before. Release. Soft, steady, more rhythm than words. "Easy, Benny. That's it. You're okay." They fitted the sling beneath his chest and belly, lifting just enough to take pressure off the weak leg without making him feel trapped. The straps creaked. The team counted together, 1, 2, 3, and Benny rose an inch off the table, suspended in a careful cradle of fabric. The moment should have been smooth. Instead, the monitor spiked, and Benny's eyes snapped open. His gaze darted, wide and alarmed, catching the movement of strangers and straps. The sedative hadn't failed, but fear was stronger than chemistry. He pulled against the sling, the weak leg trembling, and the table rattled. Kayla gasped. Someone muttered, "Hold him." Halverson stiffened, like he was watching a predicted disaster finally happen. Lauren stepped forward instinctively, but Ethan's hand shot out, blocking her. "Stay back," he warned. "You'll get hurt." Benny's trunk flailed once, then slapped against the sling, then reached toward the only thing in the room that felt constant, Lauren's voice. She could see it in the way he searched, not random now, but directed, desperate. Lauren broke Ethan's rule. She moved into the space beside the sling, slow as a tide, palms open. "Benny," she said, not loud, just firm. "Look at me." She placed one hand on his forehead, where the skin was warm and thin, and kept it there, despite the risk. "This isn't the end," she whispered. "This is the door." For a second, the whole room held its breath. Benny's eyes locked onto hers, and the panic in his body didn't vanish, but it softened, like a wave losing its sharp edge. His trunk curled and brushed her forearm, a gentle touch that felt like an answer. The monitor's rhythm steadied. The transport team exhaled as one, as if they'd been underwater. Mike watched the scene without speaking. His pen hovered above the final clearance line, and Lauren could feel the weight of his judgment, like a spotlight. Benny's breathing stayed even, and Mike finally wrote his signature with a slow, deliberate stroke. The stamp he pressed afterward was loud in the quiet room. The sound didn't just approve a transfer, it canceled an execution. They rolled Benny down the corridor on the reinforced gurney, passing the lobby where donors' names gleamed on plaques. A few staff members paused to watch, faces blank or conflicted. Kayla walked beside the gurney like a guard, eyes wet, jaw set. Halverson stayed behind. He didn't follow. The hospital, as an institution, had already let go. Outside, the air was cool and damp. Rain threatened, holding itself back. The trailer door yawned open, dark inside like a mouth. Ethan guided the sling rig into place, checking every buckle twice. Lauren climbed up one step to keep her hand near Benny's head, refusing to let him wake alone in motion. "Just a ride," she murmured. "Then we breathe different air." As the door began to close, Benny shifted slightly, the sedative pulling him toward sleep again. His trunk lifted once, weak but intentional, and tapped the metal edge near Lauren's knee. It wasn't fear now. It was contact, proof he was still here. Lauren felt a tight burn behind her eyes and swallowed it down. The latch clicked. For a heartbeat, the hospital stood behind them, bright and sterile and final. Then the engine turned over, low and steady, and the trailer began to move. Tuesday, 9 a.m., came and went, not with a needle, but with wheels on wet pavement. Lauren sat in the passenger seat of the escort vehicle, hands clenched in her lap, watching the road unspool toward Bay Haven. The fear didn't disappear. It just changed shape. Saving him was no longer a debate in a boardroom. It was a living thing, fragile and real, traveling through Florida under a sky that couldn't decide whether to break open. And somewhere inside the trailer, Benny slept through the first. Miles of a life that had almost ended on a schedule. The road to Bay Haven ran through flat stretches of pine and palmetto, past gas stations that still had their neon on from the night shift. Rain finally began as a thin mist, soft enough to feel harmless, but steady enough to darken the pavement. Lauren followed the trailer like she was guarding a heartbeat, counting each mile the way she used to count respirations. When they turned onto the sandy access road, the tires hissed over wet grit. Bay Haven looked unfinished in the gray light. Fresh posts, new fencing, a temporary shelter that smelled like cut lumber. It wasn't beautiful yet. It was simply there. And that felt like a victory. Pete stood under a poncho near the gate, arms crossed, nodding once as if to say, "You made it." Ethan climbed down first and checked the rig before anyone opened the trailer. "No surprises," he said, though his eyes betrayed how much he wanted the same thing. Kayla arrived behind them with a cooler of meds and formula. Her hair frizzed from humidity. She'd changed into plain clothes, but she still carried herself like someone who'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Inside the trailer, Benny lay sedated in the sling's support, breathing shallow but steady. The air smelled of antiseptic and rubber. Lauren spoke to him before she touched anything, because she'd learned animals felt intention even through drugs. "You're home," she whispered, and felt strange saying it about a place she barely recognized herself. They moved slowly, inch by inch, easing the sling out and lowering Benny onto the padded stall floor Ethan had insisted on. His weak leg twitched when it met the warmth of the heated mat. For a second, Lauren's stomach tightened. Pain response, spasm, fear. Then Benny exhaled, long and heavy, the way exhausted bodies exhale when they finally stop bracing. The first hour passed in careful silence. Monitors hummed. Ethan checked circulation in the foot, range in the joint, signs of swelling. Lauren kept the bottle ready, waiting for the moment Benny would accept it. Kayla sat on an overturned bucket outside the stall, staring at the fence line as if she expected someone to drive in and take him back. Then the power flickered. It started as a blink in the overhead lights, then a stutter in the monitor's display. The rain thickened, and wind pushed against the unfinished roof with an impatient shove. Pete yelled something from outside about a transformer down the road. The heated flooring cut off with a soft click, and the air changed instantly, cooler, sharper, less forgiving. Lauren's throat tightened. Benny's leg was the weak link. The place cold could turn stiffness into spiraling pain. Ethan swore under his breath and began pulling insulated blankets toward the stall. Kayla jumped up. "I've got extension cords," she said, voice high with panic. Lauren's mind raced through worst-case scenarios with brutal clarity. The storm didn't roar like a hurricane. It was worse than that. Quiet, persistent, competent. The kind that dismantled plans without drama. Rain hammered the roof in a steady rhythm, drowning out the monitors. Somewhere beyond the trees, thunder rolled like a warning. Lauren imagined Benny's body cooling, joints tightening, breathing growing shallow until the schedule found them anyway. "Generator," Lauren said, and ran. The machine was newer than the rest of Bay Haven, bought with money she didn't want to admit she'd spent. It sat beneath a tarp like a guilty secret. Lauren yanked the cord once, twice, 3 times, her arms burning, rain running into her eyes. The engine coughed, sputtered, then caught with a rough growl. Lights blinked back on in the stall. Heat returned beneath Benny like a second chance. Ethan moved fast, fitting a temporary brace to keep the weak leg aligned, hands sure despite the chaos. "He needs the joint warm," he called. We lose him." Kayla fed tubing through a gap in the fence, connecting the monitor to the restored power. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't stop. She was terrified, and she was still there. Benny began to stir as the sedative wore thinner. His eyes opened halfway, unfocused at first, then sharpening with confusion. The storm noises startled him, each thunder roll a strange new predator. He shifted in the stall and made a soft, breathy sound. Not quite a trumpet, more like a question. Lauren stepped close and let him see her face. "It's okay," she said, voice steady over the rain. "That's just the sky being loud." Benny's trunk lifted an inch, then dropped, heavy with fatigue. Lauren touched his cheek lightly and felt warmth under her fingertips. A live warmth. Not the sterile warmth of heat lamps, but the living kind that belonged to bodies that refused to quit. When the storm finally eased into a drizzle, the sanctuary felt like it had survived its first trial. Ethan checked Benny one more time and leaned back, exhaustion pulling at his features. "He's stable," he said, as if the word surprised him. Kayla let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob, and she wiped her face hard with her sleeve. Lauren sat on the ground outside the stall, back against the fence, listening to Benny's breathing settle into a slower rhythm. The adrenaline drained, leaving behind a quiet emptiness and a thin thread of relief. She looked out across the wet field, at the half-built posts and muddy footprints, and realized this was what rescue actually looked like: messy, expensive, uncertain. Inside the stall, Benny shifted and made a low rumble so soft it might have been imagined. His trunk stretched toward the fence and rested there, as if he needed to know the boundary was real, that this place would hold. Lauren reached out and placed her fingers near the tip of his trunk, not grabbing, just meeting him halfway. The night came on gently after that, humid and calm, the storm moving off toward the coast. Kayla dozed in a folding chair. Ethan left instructions on a clipboard and promised to return at first light. Lauren stayed where she was, watching Benny's chest rise and fall, letting the quiet wrap around them. Tuesday had passed. The schedule had been rewritten. But in the soft darkness of Bay Haven, Lauren understood something new. The rescue wasn't the trailer ride or the stamp on Mike's form. The rescue was this: staying through the night, keeping the heat on, holding the line when the sky tried to take him back. Morning at Bay Haven came in layers. First the damp smell of wet soil, then the pale light sliding through the pines, then the chorus of birds, acting like the storm had never happened. Lauren hadn't really slept. She drifted in and out on the ground beside the fence, waking to every change in Benny's breathing, like it was her own name being called. Benny was awake when the sun finally cleared the tree line. Not standing, not yet, but alert in a way that felt new. His trunk explored the edge of the stall, tracing the wood grain, testing the air, pausing when it found Lauren's sleeve. He took the bottle more willingly than the day before, drinking in slow pulls, then resting as if he understood the pattern. Effort, then recovery. Ethan arrived with coffee and a small duffel bag of gear, looking like a man who'd argued with himself all night and lost. He checked the leg, adjusted the brace, and watched Benny shift his weight. "He's compensating," Ethan said. "Not disappointed, just observant. It'll save him now, but we have to teach him a better way." Lauren nodded. She didn't need a lecture. She needed a plan. They made routines out of small, repeatable things: heat, hydration, gentle range of motion. One step, then rest. Kayla kept notes on a whiteboard like a battlefield log: feeds, meds, vitals, tiny wins. In the afternoon, Benny managed to lift himself halfway, wobble, then settle back down without crashing. Lauren felt relief so sharp it almost hurt. By the end of the first week, the limp was still there, but the falling had slowed. Benny learned where the warmest spots were and started waiting near the gate at feeding time, eyes following Lauren with patient expectation. He developed a fascination with a blue rubber tub, pushing it with his trunk until it bumped the fence. The smallest play looked like a miracle in a body that had once been scheduled to end. The outside world, of course, didn't stay quiet. A local news van appeared one afternoon, creeping down the sandy road like it had sniffed out a story. A reporter stepped out with perfect hair and a microphone, asking for a quick statement about the baby elephant saved from euthanasia. Lauren didn't invite her in. She didn't slam the gate either. She stood between the camera and Benny's stall and said, "This isn't a show. This is medical care." Still, the clip aired that night. Grainy footage of Bay Haven fencing, Benny's small shape moving in the background, Lauren's tired face half lit. Comments exploded online. Most were supportive, some were cruel, a few were dangerous. She stole him. That elephant should be put down. Someone needs to inspect that place. Lauren read none of it, but Kayla did, and her hands shook as she scrolled. 2 days later, Officer Mike Turner texted a single line. Expect pushback. It came in the form of a complaint filed with the state, anonymous, neatly worded, accusing Lauren of running an unlicensed exhibit and putting the public at risk. Mike showed up the next morning with a new clipboard and a face that told Lauren this wasn't a friendly visit. "This is what happens when a story gets out," he said. "People pick sides, then they start swinging." Lauren walked him through the protocols. Double fencing, no public access, signage, medical logs, Ethan's oversight. Mike listened, unsmiling, taking notes like a man who couldn't afford to be moved by emotion. When he reached the stall, Benny lifted his head and watched him carefully, then returned his focus to Lauren's voice as she spoke. Mike noticed. Lauren saw it in the way his eyes narrowed. Less suspicion, more assessment. The inspection ended with a warning, not a shutdown. "You're close," Mike said. "But if you want to keep him, you need a formal plan, safety upgrades, documentation, and you can't keep pretending no one will come knocking." He paused, then added softer, "I'm not your enemy, but I'm not your shield, unless you make it easy for me to be." That night, Lauren sat outside Benny's stall with a clipboard and a pen, drafting policies under a headlamp. The work felt endless. The money felt thinner every day. When she finally lowered her head into her hands, exhaustion broke through her control. She didn't sob loudly. She just let the tears come, hot and quiet, the kind that arrived when no one was asking you to be strong. Benny shifted. Lauren felt it before she saw it, the soft thud of weight moving closer, the faint rustle of straw. She looked up and found him standing, wobbly but upright, his weak leg trembling. He took a careful step toward the fence, then another, slower, like he was choosing each movement on purpose. His trunk lifted and reached through the gap as far as it could go. It touched her shoulder. The contact was gentle, almost hesitant, as if Benny was afraid of hurting her. He made a low rumble that vibrated in the air more than it sounded, a comforting frequency elephants use with each other. Lauren froze, tears still on her face, feeling the absurdity of being consoled by the very animal she'd been trying to save. Kayla stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching, one hand pressed to her mouth. She didn't interrupt. She didn't record. She simply witnessed the moment the story quietly turned, when rescue stopped being one-directional. Lauren's breathing slowed under Benny's steady touch, and something inside her unclenched for the first time in months. The next afternoon, Mike returned unexpectedly, not with a clipboard this time, but with a woman and a little girl. The girl sat in a wheelchair, small hands clenched in her lap, eyes down. The woman looked tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. Mike cleared his throat. "This is Maya," he said. "Her dad signed the consent forms. They've tried everything else." Lauren's instinct was to say no. Benny was still young, still fragile, still learning. But then Benny, hearing voices, moved toward the fence with that same quiet curiosity, trunk lifted, searching, not for attention, but for connection. Maya glanced up at him, then away, as if she didn't trust herself to want anything. When Benny's trunk reached the edge of the fence, it paused, hovering, waiting. Maya stared at his leg brace, at the uneven way he balanced, at the careful patience in the way he didn't rush her. Her voice came out small and sharp, like a shield. "He looks weird," she said. Then, after a beat, she added the part that mattered. "Like me." Lauren didn't correct her. She didn't offer a speech. She simply said, "Then you already understand him." Benny made a soft rumble, and Maya's mouth twitched, the smallest almost smile, like a door cracking open. As they left that evening, Maya looked back over her shoulder and asked, barely above a whisper, "Can I come again?" Lauren watched Benny sway gently, still standing, still trying, and felt the next chapter forming in real time. The schedule had been rewritten once. Now, without meaning to, Benny was starting to rewrite someone else's. Bay Haven changed after Maya's first visit, Not in a dramatic, overnight way, but in the slow, stubborn way real change arrives. Lauren added a second gate, then a third. She painted fresh warning signs and installed a camera system she could barely afford. Every improvement felt like buying time with money she didn't have, but the alternative was losing everything to one complaint. Maya came back the next week with her dad, Ray, rolling her chair over the sandy path like he didn't trust the ground to hold her. He tried to look tough, but his eyes kept flicking to Benny's brace, to the way the calf leaned into his good leg, to the effort that made even standing look like work. Maya didn't speak much at first. She just watched. Benny approached the fence with the same careful patience he'd shown before. He didn't rush her chair or flare his ears. He stopped a few feet back, trunk lifted, waiting for permission the way Ethan had taught him, slow, predictable, safe. When Maya finally held out her hand, Benny touched it lightly, then pulled back, as if he'd learned that gentleness was its own kind of strength. After that, the visits became a rhythm. Maya started calling her therapy exercises, Benny minutes, and Ray stopped arguing with her physical therapist on speakerphone. One afternoon, Maya asked Ethan how Benny practiced balance, and Ethan, surprised, showed her a simple shifting drill. Ray watched his daughter lean forward in her chair, engaged for the first time in months, and his shoulders lowered like he'd been holding a weight alone. Word traveled anyway. A pediatric rehab nurse mentioned Bay Haven to a colleague. A local support group shared the news in a private Facebook post. Then the post wasn't private anymore. Lauren woke up to messages from strangers, some kind, some cruel, some asking if they could bring their kids by this weekend. She said no to all of them. "Not yet," she typed, until her fingers cramped. Officer Mike Turner came back with paperwork instead of warnings. He explained how to apply for a limited, supervised animal-assisted therapy permit, how to document safety protocols, how to cap visitor numbers, how to keep the sanctuary from becoming a roadside attraction. "If you do this right," he said, "you protect Benny, and you protect the kids." It was the closest thing to an apology he'd ever offer. Lauren worked nights to build the program the way she built the fencing, one practical piece at a time. She created a quiet waiting area under a shade canopy, ordered hand-washing stations, and wrote rules in plain language. No sudden movements, no flash photography, no unsupervised contact. Bay Haven didn't need hype. It needed structure strong enough to hold a fragile miracle. Then the state sent a final inspection notice, and the date on it made Lauren's stomach drop. They wanted to observe a session. If they found public access or unsafe conditions, they could shut Bay Haven down and seize Benny for relocation. Tuesday had been replaced by another kind of scheduled ending, and Lauren hated how familiar that felt. On the day of the inspection, Maya arrived early, hair brushed neatly, face serious like she understood stakes without being told. Ray carried a small folding stool and set it down like he planned to stay standing guard. Ethan checked Benny's brace twice. Kayla, now officially on leave from the hospital, held a clipboard and tried to smile like her hands weren't trembling. The inspectors walked in with neutral faces and sharp eyes, accompanied by a state veterinarian who looked at Benny like a problem to be measured. Benny stood quietly behind the double fence, tail flicking, ears relaxed. When Maya rolled forward, Benny shifted his weight and took a careful step. One step, then stillness, waiting for her cue. Lauren watched the inspector's pens move and forced herself not to breathe too hard. Maya held out her hand, and Benny touched it, then backed away exactly as he'd been trained. Maya laughed, a short, surprise sound, then caught herself, like laughter was something she didn't fully trust. The state vet asked Maya what she liked about coming here. Maya looked down at her own leg brace, then at Benny's. "He tries again," she said simply. "So I try again." For a moment, even the inspectors seemed uncertain what to do with that. The permit wasn't approved on the spot. Nothing was that easy. But when the group left, Mike lingered, closing his folder with a slow nod. "You're building something legitimate," he said. "Keep it tight, keep it safe, And don't let the internet turn him into a mascot. Lauren swallowed the relief that rose too fast and nodded back. That night, when the sanctuary finally went quiet, Lauren stood alone by Benny's stall and stared at the old printed euthanasia form she'd brought from the hospital. She'd taped it inside a cabinet door at Bay Haven, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how close the world came to deciding for him. Tuesday, 9 a.m., was still there in ink. It looked smaller now, almost ridiculous. She heard a truck on the access road and turned, heart jolting. Headlights swept across the fence line, then stopped at the gate. A woman stepped out, older, sun-worn, wearing boots that had seen work. Behind her, the trailer bore a name Lauren recognized from a hard phone call weeks earlier, a Texas roadside attraction that had shut down under citations. The woman introduced herself as Marlene, an elephant handler turned advocate. "I heard what you did," she said, "and I heard what you still don't have." She gestured toward the trailer. "An elephant needs an elephant. I've got one who's running out of options. Her name's Daisy." Lauren's pulse hammered. She'd thought about this, the social need Benny couldn't outgrow, but she hadn't dared move toward it yet. "I don't have space," Lauren said automatically, then hated how much she sounded like the sanctuaries that had turned her away. Marlene's gaze didn't flinch. "You have heart," she replied. "Space can be built." Daisy's arrival wasn't a celebration. It was a new risk, wrapped in steel and chains. Daisy was older, scarred, her eyes wary. Her hind legs carried the stiffness of years on concrete. When she stepped down the ramp into the adjacent enclosure, she didn't charge, she didn't trumpet. She just stood, breathing, assessing the night like it had betrayed her before. Benny sensed her immediately. He moved to the fence line, closest to the new enclosure, and made a low rumble that vibrated through the boards. Daisy lifted her head, ears tilting, and answered with a sound so deep Lauren felt it more than heard it. They stood separated by double fencing, the space between them charged with something ancient and cautious. Lauren expected tension, maybe fear. Instead, Benny did what he always did. He tried. He extended his trunk through the gap as far as it would go, patient, unhurried. Daisy took one step forward, then another, slow as sunrise. When Benny's weak leg trembled from standing too long, Daisy angled her body so the wind hit her first, shielding him without touching him at all. It was the smallest gesture, almost invisible, and it shattered Lauren. Kayla watched from the doorway, hand over her heart. Ethan stood beside her, silent. Even Ray, who'd stayed late to fix a loose latch, froze mid-step as if he'd walked into a sacred room. No one spoke. The only sound was the quiet rhythm of two elephants breathing in the same air for the first time. Later, after Daisy settled and the paperwork stack grew taller, Lauren sat on the porch steps with Mike's new permit packet beside her and Maya's forgotten hoodie draped over the railing. She looked across the dark enclosure where Benny stood near Daisy, smaller now beside a shape that felt like history. They had scheduled his death. She had scheduled his rescue. And in the soft Florida night, with a wounded older elephant choosing to stand guard over a calf who refused to surrender, Lauren understood the last twist of the story. The rescue wasn't just a canceled appointment. It was a new calendar altogether, one where the imperfect weren't erased, but gathered, one where survival didn't end at alive. It became belonging. Before you go, what would you have done in Lauren's shoes? Comment 0 if you think the zoo should have followed the schedule. Comment 1 if you believe she did the right thing and saved Benny. And if Benny's story moved you even a little, hit subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and you won't want to miss it.